Welcome to today's AI governance webinar on managing AI risk. Today, we're going to discuss how a principles-based approach can help you manage AI-related risk, building out your AI risk governance program through a flexible four-phased approach, and how TrustArc can help. The spread of AI adoption is unprecedented, with it being the most highly adopted technology as generative AI models became easily accessible to all of us. The need for regulations around the development and deployment of AI has been quickly recognized, with the EU AI Act coming into force earlier this month, and the state of Colorado passing the first law in the US to regulate AI. Many jurisdictions have issued guidelines and frameworks. Gary, why are we seeing this rapid adoption of regulations and AI-related frameworks?
Joanne, thank you so much for asking. I always like to start with what right do I have to an opinion, and I'll share with you what that right is. We conducted for TrustArc the Global Privacy Benchmarks Report in the spring of 2024. So we have some really up-to-date findings that we're going to intersperse throughout this presentation today. And with that, it's our 5th year running. It's really the only true global appraisal, the state of privacy worldwide. And this year, AI was a dominant theme, no surprise to anyone. Now, what's really interesting about this study is it takes a 360-degree view. It includes executives, management, the front line, from predominantly medium and large-size enterprises. And then additionally, we talk to privacy team members and privacy leaders. So what I'm showing here are a couple of top-line results. One is, no surprise to anybody, I'm sure, but most companies, like 9 out of 10, are saying AI is very important to their company in relation to privacy concerns and regulations that are coming, as you said, Joanne, sort of fast and furious. And the second kind of top line result we'll start with is that, we asked a whole number, actually 12 different challenges that companies have and that they're facing now with respect to privacy, and AI was absolutely the top of that list. So we've got some data to share with you as we go through these slides and guide you in terms of your thinking, the audience thinking in terms of AI and privacy. And again, I'm happy to share what the world thinks on this issue as well, based on the work that you commissioned at TrustArc.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. And so with the increased adoption of AI, as with an emerging technology, comes new risk. And this has been true throughout with any new adoption of new technologies. And what we're seeing is vendors who incorporate AI into their solutions are now facing more questions from customers who are looking for transparency and accountability around the use of AI. There's an increased reputational risk, followed by regulatory risk and data processing risk, as there is an exponential increase of the volume of data being used by AI. Hey, Kristen, you speak with a lot of different companies regularly. What is it that you're hearing? What are they most worried about in terms of managing AI-related risk?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I've talked to customers about. I think one is how they can fold this into their existing privacy program and make sure that with the new laws and regulations that are coming out, that they take the right approach to how they're structuring their program. I think the other thing that customers have mentioned they're really concerned with is how they'll manage the additional work that will come along with complying with AI risk. I know many of our customers are tight on resources and have small teams, so they're really trying to figure out a way to holistically look at risk and understand how they can take a risk-based approach to managing AI risk and other types of risk as well. So I would say, it really comes down to how they want to adopt their program and then how they're going to manage the workload.
Awesome. Hey, Gary, what are you seeing here?
Yeah, let's look at some key results here. Let's just start on the left so you're not overwhelmed. There's some really cool stuff here, I believe. You look on the left and you see that, just under half of companies globally that we surveyed indicate that they've already integrated AI into their products and services, or they're well on their way to doing so. They've made it a high priority. And so, and you can see others are taking more of a wait and see approach. Now, as you move to the right and you see our global privacy index, that's the score that companies have who fell into these different segments, if you will. And what you can see here that's rather startling, and this is the part that I thought was very, very interesting, perhaps at first counterintuitive, but then as you think about it more and more, it makes sense. Companies that scored highest on our privacy competency index, as measured by our overall number of questions we ask around privacy and their approaches, we see that they are the ones who are most aggressively integrating AI. So being competent at AI is associated here with also being competent at privacy. Companies, if you will, that get it, really get it, and want to be at the forefront are ones who are also able and can deeply think and then operationalize how to approach this on the AI side, are also ones who've already experienced competence at doing so on the privacy front. As the popular saying goes now, don't worry, you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you may be replaced by somebody who's competent at AI. And we certainly see here these results, evidence of that. Now, if you look a little further to the right, as I said earlier, we also spoke within this survey to people who work in the privacy teams. And here it's even more startling. Within companies with privacy teams, it's a little bit higher in terms of making it a priority. And you can see their global privacy index scores are even higher. So the average on the privacy index globally was 60%. And you can see here, for privacy teams in companies where they've already adopted and integrated AI, their privacy competence is already at sort of an A or an A plus, sitting at 85% as an average. So I think this is really important. And being competent at one means you're being competent at another. The corollary is something, again, to think about, which is if you're taking an overly cautious approach to AI, and for goodness sakes, I think we all know the horror stories. We know why you should take a cautious approach. But if your cautious approach means we're not going to tackle it just now, that is associated with also, on the downside, not being particularly competent at privacy. So I think that's really interesting and begs some questions around how should we approach this? And I guess the key finding that I see here overall is that, well, you need to tackle it right away, and you need to tackle it with all the standards, tools, methodologies, people, process that you have for tackling anything that's important.
And I think that makes a good transition to kind of the next part of our discussion is around what are the different frameworks, how are regulators approaching this, and and how the frameworks like OECD AI principles and the White House's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. These are providing the foundations for companies to develop the practices necessary to protect individuals from AI-related harms, especially around human oversight around system outputs, enabling people to challenge adverse outcomes that impact them. And we're seeing these principles being incorporated into new AI-related regulations, which is why I feel regulators are taking a more principles-based approach in developing them, because this is also, giving companies the ability to kind of take that more cautious approach and, really think through how they're going to implement these type of requirements. And the regulations that we're seeing, essentially are designed to leverage a risk-based approach to assess, the potential harms that may occur from the use of AI, provide those protections from those harms, especially if there's a negative impact on people, and ensure that responsible practices are implemented, throughout the entire AI system life cycle. So ensuring that, privacy by design and, data protection by design are implemented from the outset as you're developing the AI system or deploying an AI system. And also what we're seeing is that both developers and deployers of, these systems have responsibility and accountability under these emerging regulations. By way of example, the EU AI Act focuses on identifying and managing AI risks, especially if developing or deploying a high-risk AI system. Colorado, in turn, focuses on transparency and places a greater level of responsibility on the deployers of an AI system to implement a risk management program and conduct those risk assessments. And also, in addition to the regulations that are specific around AI, data protection laws still apply as AI systems are used to process large amounts of personal data. So, in addition to things that regulations that are specific to AI, you do need to consider, how do existing data protection laws impact the implementation of AI within your organization. So again, the main takeaway here is that it's essential to identify and understand the risk associated with AI systems within your company, and taking a principles-based approach to build out your AI risk governance program and identify and manage these risks will help streamline this process. And so, Gary, my question to you is, how do frameworks help companies start to take a principles-based approach?
Well, let's look at our next slide, Joanne. And I think some of the data and findings here, as we sort of correlate them, begin to tell a story. Again, I'll just remind you, 60% was the average in terms of our privacy competence. And what we're showing here is in the stars, every company that took an approach to standards and frameworks that were highly detailed in terms of the privacy requirements did exceptionally well, much better on average, 12 points higher just on average than others. The interesting thing, other couple of interesting things we're showing here, if you look at each of the bars, is that, look, at just taking on any standard or framework is helpful. All of these companies scored above 60%, but some frameworks, there are frameworks and standards, and then there are some that are highly technical and allow you to sort of advance further in the game. And again, those are highlighted in the light blue. So they include your NIMBY framework and others that are highly technical on the privacy standards as well. I guess just a final point here, just the ability to competently tackle a standard, deploy a framework, get the hard work operationally done behind it. You need a strong set of principles to be able to be bold and go on that mission and to actually get the job done. What I find interesting then on our sort of my last point in terms of the data here is that, look, although they all work, the kind of the road less traveled seems to be the better road. So if you've adopted more general standards frameworks, absolutely, it seems to help. But if you take ones that have a high detail oriented view on what you need to do on the privacy front, you do even better. And so I think all of that is important for our audience today, which is, going back to my earlier point, you got to tackle it. Don't get left behind with AI. And then in terms of a principle-based approach, in behind the principles should be some really rigorous standards by which you hold yourself in order to, if you will, win at this game.
Yeah, and great point on that. And also, frameworks are designed to be living documents. So, they evolve as, technology evolves, or, the approaches that companies take evolve. So, for example, like the NIMBY framework, we updated that towards the end of 2023 to address AI specific activities that companies should should consider undertaking to help them manage those AI risks. So, as part of taking that principles based approach, you also want to ensure that the framework that you're choosing to adopt, is something that is reviewed and updated regularly.
Very good. Well, if I could, on our next slide, I just want to You've mentioned it a couple of times now, Joanne. I really want to drive home this approach again from the evidence side. We asked a question around just what approach do you take to privacy? Do you take a principles approach? Do you take a very rules-based approach? Maybe you take a hybrid approach, a mixture of the two. And then for some, although it's not many, maybe you have no clear privacy strategy at all. Again, then we correlate that to what separately people tell us, respondents told us in terms of their, and this is their own companies. You'd think there'd be a bias to say, hey, we're great at this. We asked them their own privacy competence based on a series of questions. And we see the results here, I think, are even more startling. First, I hate to start with the negative, but let's just put that aside. If you have no clear privacy strategy, wow, your privacy competence is, you're probably scoring a D or an F. The scale can go actually technically from -100 to 100. Again, the average was 60. And companies that don't have a strategy, their average competency in privacy was just 11%. But the good news is that's just 5% of companies worldwide that we measured don't have an approach at all. If you just took a strictly rules-based approach, you're actually still scoring a little bit less than average. It's just about around a third of companies just say, okay, what are the rules and how do we get on top of this? But as you pointed out earlier, Joanne, there's so many different regulations coming down the pipe that's probably an unrealistic approach. And it probably means you haven't really grasped the principles. You're just chasing after, this isn't just about software. This isn't just, what are the requirements and how we write them down and then how do we implement them. This is about how do we adopt some principles that everyone signs on to, and then everyone knows their job, into not just the developers, but everyone knows their job in terms of what they have to do to maintain that privacy for all stakeholders. And so I'm kind of moving from right to left here, but companies that took a hybrid approach, almost half, which makes sense. I would think this result did not surprise me. 45% you see here take this hybrid approach, and I would have guessed that was the most common one because it seems to be, if you started with kind of the granddaddies of, we've got GDPR, we've got CCPA if we're in the US, and then we kind of add on to that on more of a principles-based approach to new stuff coming down. Look, a lot of companies, you're in good company. A lot of companies are doing that. And you score actually just, when you look at the correlation, you score a little bit above average if you do that. But the one that really stood out for me, and I'm getting to, is that companies that took a principle-based framework approach, again, the road less traveled, a little less than 1 in 5, 17%. They scored really highly on our privacy competence index. They've got, as you can see here, 74%. So just again, to drive home your point, Joanne, that and Kristen, your experience working with companies, that the ones who adopt principles, the ones that who operationally do the hard work to implement those are clearly just the act of taking those approaches puts them on good standing. Our research certainly supports that view, and some rather startling results here in terms of where that can take you.
Yeah, and Gary, and we took a look at this, and on the next slide, what we've done is, we talked to a lot of different companies, Kristen and I, about their approach to managing the use of AI, and through those discussions, we've identified kind of 4 key phases to building out an AI risk governance program. As the last slide showed, a number of companies are, still figuring that out. And what we've learned through our conversations is that, typically you may start with understanding, what the different regulatory frameworks or requirements are, figuring out what your approach is and what you need to build out your governance program. But also in parallel, because these things don't necessarily happen in a, step 1, step 2, you may be doing multiple things in parallel. You're also probably thinking about like where you may have AI risk, starting to identify how and where AI is being used within your organization. And notice I didn't say if, but how. And this is because a number of commonly used, third-party services, as I mentioned earlier, are integrating AI into their solutions, which is why it's important to identify how AI is being used and what the risks are. And then, once you've identified where you have AI risks, assess, the controls that you have in place that, align with the principles and the requirements that you're assessing against, and, addressing any areas that require improvement. Then, that last piece of, communicating both to internal and external stakeholders via third-party certification that you have responsible use of AI practices are in place. So that's kind of, that kind of final step. And though, this phased approach enables you to start your AI risk governance journey at any point. And this is designed to be flexible to meet you where you are. So, for example, one company I spoke with a few weeks ago, they're focused on understanding their AI risk and assessing the controls that they have in place to manage that. Others, may leverage that certification review process as a starting point to determine what they need to do to set up their AI risk governance. Because certification standards are a great set of principles that will help you towards your compliance as well as putting a responsible program in place. And, on the next slide, we show some ways that, we can help no matter where you're at on your AI risk governance journey. We have solutions to help, whether you're researching and want to understand the latest requirements or regulatory activity, wanting to easily identify and assess AI risk, or understand your AI governance posture from an organizational level, and then have that effective, simple way to communicate that responsible AI practices are in place. And, that's where we can help. Hey, Kristen, what are some of the common approaches you're seeing companies take to build out their AI risk governance?
Yeah, and I think, to your point before, it really depends on the company. We can really meet you wherever you are in your risk journey and where your company is with building AI risk and compliance into your overall program. I've seen, a number of customers who are really interested in kicking off a questionnaire as quickly as possible so they can start to understand the risk that some vendors they are working with pose on their organization, while others are still in the phase where they're determining, what are these AI regulations all about and how do they apply to their organization? And they're looking for actionable insights that they can bring back to their organization as they craft their privacy program. So I think it really depends on the organization, but TrustArc offers end-to-end solutions to meet our customers no matter where they are in their journey.
Yeah,
Kristen,
and Kristen, one of our member of our audience, asked, are you seeing companies still relying on the privacy office to manage AI governance? And then kind of more broadly, data governance? Or is there a trend that, you're seeing companies separate their governance program with AI governance as a subset outside the privacy office?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I only have anecdotal evidence to speak off of from what I've talked to customers about. But what I'm starting to see and hear is that within the privacy department, organizations are starting to create a specific AI privacy manager or role that solely focuses on AI risk compliance. And I think I have a few reasons why I think this is, but one, I think like in shaping your program to adhere to the new laws and regulations that are coming out, that's one task and challenge that our customers are facing. But then there's also the learning curve of understanding AI on its own. And that person might need to be a little bit more tech savvy or understand how the tech works, so that when they speak to third parties or vendors, they can ask the right questions to gauge the risk, that leveraging that third party has on their privacy program. So, just recently, I've seen some new roles in the privacy space pop up that are specific to AI, but I think it'll probably depend on the size of the organization and how they structure their team. But it is a trend that I'm starting to see a little bit more often. Curious, Joanne, if you're seeing the same or hearing the same?
I am. In fact, I am seeing companies start to separate out some of the AI governance activities where there's a team that's focused specifically on identifying and managing AI risk to their organization, but they also liaise very closely with the privacy team. So, as they work together. So, to your point, Kristen, yeah, we are seeing roles that are specific to managing and governing the use of AI within organizations.
Yeah, and I think one more note on that, it probably depends to what type of vendors different organizations are working with. Some that are relying quite a bit on various SaaS solutions might have more risk than others. So I think it's really dependent on the industry and what your organization's doing. But yeah, it's been interesting to see how it's taken shape over the last quarter or so.
Yeah.
If I may jump in, sorry, Joanne and Kristen, if I may jump in, it's what I find interesting about AI is there's an interesting correlate all the way back to an area that I've done a lot of research in, completely unrelated to technology, in terms of digital technology, but actually like in the construction space. And like if you needed to build something, so this is so urgent, then it's kind of like going back to saying, well, why is this important to our customers or clients, and how do we do it safely? Doing it safely isn't like an afterthought or something once you've decided to do it. The two always have to go hand in hand. If you can answer the question, why am I doing, why are we building out this AI capability? Because it's important to clients, like what are clients and customers demanding? And at the same time, you build safety into it. And in this case, the analog is how do we build privacy into it? How do we protect clients and customers at the same time that we're servicing them better? I think this takes the conversation at all levels, not just within the privacy team, to a better place, rather than just starting with, what are the technical requirements to be done? So if you can understand why it's important to your clients, including keeping information private, then you can move on to how can we do it safely, securely, privately. And then what I love about the end of your workflow, of your flow here, is then how do you, once you've done that, how do you communicate it back simply to the end users or clients? And I see your certification is doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and another question from our audience, and Gary and Kristen, great to have your thoughts here, is, one of the challenges, and Kristen may, as we talk about, our approach to managing AI risk is, how do you monitor that risk in an environment where AI models keep changing to keep abreast of, customer demands, especially, I guess, as you're a vendor, incorporating AI into your solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, when you're assessing a vendor, one important thing to know is what type of model they're using, so that maybe you don't have to be as reactive to small changes. And maybe, let's say, I think like the data they're collecting, but are they training, their AI? Are they using a model that trains their AI instance off of your data, or is it strictly just leveraging data that it has access to and providing it to you? So I think like to start with, it's important to understand the difference between those models, and then you can kind of see which ones have higher risk naturally from there, and which might have lower risk. So for example, if there's a bot and it's trained on an organization's documents, that's very low risk because it's not accessing any of your data. So you might not need to keep your eye on that quite as much as a model that is accessing your data and making meaningful insights from that. Joanne, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think we need to think about these things too, and I think that's a good kind of transition, kind of talk about, where we're not only helping companies manage AI risks, but, we ourselves also have to manage AI risk as we're incorporating AI into our solutions. Going to the next slide, looking at, some of the different ways that we do help companies to understand the requirements and figuring out, like, what are the best approaches out there to manage AI risk, and especially as things are evolving, within Nimity research, AI is one of our hot button topics as, we look towards, our building out our references, and then also our topics where we break out different requirements and frameworks by jurisdiction and providing those operational templates, such as around red teaming, overall governance checklists, to help you build out that governance program. And Kristen, you want to talk about our Nimity AI bot? Because I think this is a great example to that question of, how even we ourselves are having to manage this too.
Yeah, and I think like in terms of keeping your finger on the pulse, Nimity AI is a great tool that can streamline your workload and get you the answers you need about how to comply with AI requirements and what it means for your organization. So a little bit about how this works. Nimity Research has over 40,000 pieces of content that we trained our own in-house AI bot on, so that you can ask it questions about AI requirements or more broadly privacy questions or anything within the privacy space. And it can quickly come up with a response that it curates, looking at all of the in-house created content that our privacy and legal team has created. So I know, talking to customers, that before we deployed Nimity AI, some customers would look at various resources and they would spend hours trying to figure out or find the right answer to their question. And they would absolutely dread when someone internally sent them a question and they needed to find the specific answer and it was going to take them a couple hours. And a lot of customers have said to me, now I can just use Nimity AI. I can fire back emails answering those questions a lot more quickly. And I can also use this to answer my own questions as well without having to dedicate a couple hours of time. So I think it's a great tool and, really positive feedback from our customers. The other thing that customers really like is that we show the resources that we use to answer a question. So this is pretty unique, so that if you Google a question or use ChatGPT, you don't necessarily always know what was used to populate your answer. So we've created a reference section where you can see exactly what articles we use to create that answer, and you can then redirect into Nimity Research if you want to get a detailed view of the article and the specific information that we pulled. But it's a great tool and it's saving customers, a ton of time throughout their week.
Yeah, and I think one of the key points there, Kristen, is that, we're providing transparency into how the AI bot, came up with its response. How it learns is a little bit of a black box, and that's true kind of with any AI model. But the idea is, providing that transparency in, how it's learning is, I think, a key, a unique feature that we offer here.
Yep, and it's with all of the new AI capabilities that have come out, there's a lot of customization that you can do. So we've pointed it at our research, our in-house content that we've created. So it's learning and inferring that information. And then if it doesn't have an answer based off of that information, we can point it to the larger LLM. But we're using mainly our in-house curated content to answer those questions.
Awesome. And, and that's, kind of the first, phase. Look at the second phase and, where you're actually probably doing these activities in parallel, talking about risk, and how to manage and mitigate that risk. And Kristen, you want to talk a bit about exactly, kind of what we're doing here?
Yeah, so another common question that customers have is, how am I going to keep track of all this? How do I know which vendors or which business processes or systems are using AI? And how do I evaluate the risk that each of these has to my organization? So very exciting, but this quarter releasing a new feature that will automatically calculate the AI risk for your business processes, your systems, third-party records, and company entities. And then point you to the right assessment that you need to complete based off of our evaluation of the AI risk and the level of severity that it's bringing to your organization. So we've incorporated this into the data inventory hub and risk profile. And we also will provide reporting as well. So you can easily generate a PDF report, or if you have some data crunching you need to do, you can export the CSV as well. But all of those records that are already created will automatically have an AI risk score. So you don't have to go back and redo a lot of work. As long as the fields that we need to do the calculation are complete, then once we deploy the feature, you'll see an AI risk and an AI inherent risk score populated for those records.
Kristen, can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
How do you approach this? You mentioned inherent risk. How do you approach inherent and also the residual risk with AI? There's a question that Chad, I think that has to do with this as well. But the residual risk, it's not the one that you originally were solving for, but it's now, because of AI, an additional inherent risk. I'm just curious how you help companies either guide or approach that.
Yeah, so a good way to think about inherent risk is a baseline understanding of what the risk score would be based off of the information that's being processed or the information that's in that record. And then after you have an inherent risk score, we suggest an assessment. And then after that assessment is completed, there's a control effectiveness score, and basically the residual risk score is the score that remains after we understand the initial score and then what safeguards you have in place to prevent risk for your organization, and that'll get you your residual risk score. So I like to think of the residual risk score as more of the actual risk that is posed on your organization, and the inherent risk is just kind of like our best guess based off of an algorithm that we have, and quite a lot of factors actually that go into the inherent risk score. Joanne, is there anything you want to point out with those scores that might be helpful as well?
Yeah, and especially as you're inventorying systems that use AI, and especially systems from vendors, it is really going to be important to understand, the type of data that's being used within those systems, the processing purposes, to identify any potential third-party risks related to AI. And the question that we have here from our audience is, with AI and wanting, the desire to, the need for data to train AI models, is there a blurring of the lines between the roles of controller and processor, especially as it relates to, the controller, is the one that dictates the nature of the processing, but, does AI change that? And and kind of thinking through this, as our part of our conversation and thinking through AI risks, this is why, managing that third-party system risk that's leveraging AI is going to be critically important, because you need to understand, what is the learning model that the vendor is using, what type of data are they using to train that model? Are they anonymizing that information? What steps are they taking towards data minimization? Because remember, those requirements under data protection laws still apply, especially like those around data minimization. And given the nature of AI uses a lot of data, is that vendor being mindful and taking steps to really think through what data is necessary to train its model? And, does it have to be, personal information or sensitive personal information that's part of that training of the model? So those are the types of questions that you as a controller are going to need to, ask and include as part of your assessment of your vendors as they are integrating AI into their solutions. Their goal is, to make your jobs easier. But you also need to ensure that they're doing it in a way that helps, that aligns with your organization's tolerance for risk. So, there's definitely a lot of, considerations around AI risk management that, we're looking to, incorporate into our solution to help, but, automate some of that for you. Why don't we take a look at also how you can look at how you're implementing AI kind of across your AI best practices across your organization, and kind of measure from an organizational level of how you're complying with these different regulations and frameworks. Let's take a look at the next slide. Yeah, so our privacy central solution is designed to help you assess get across different standards like the EU AI Act, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, the OECD AI principles, and a variety of different laws. And one of the key value propositions of Privacy Central is that this is designed to help you streamline your governance program and give you an overall organizational view of kind of where you stand against these frameworks. And also you can do like some internal benchmarking across like your different organizational units to see how how they're measuring up against your overall organization requirements and frameworks. So this is a way to uh you know uh a way to do that. And also, part of the work that we do is we identify common controls across these different frameworks as a way to help streamline that work, also help you quickly identify any areas that require improvement, and also track your progress and report to your stakeholders, where you are at. And Gary, I think you have some, additional information around, why this is important.
Absolutely. If we go to our next slide, you're absolutely right, Joanne. You have to remove the guesswork. Anecdotes can be helpful. We all love to hear a story that's compelling, but at the end of the day, if you want to run a business, we've used the word a few times, competently, you've got to put in some measurement. And we all know the old adage, you can't manage what you're not measuring. So our company's measuring privacy. Let's just walk through our little data narrative here. You can see the upper chart here on the left from 2022 through to 2024. More and more companies are measuring it as we see, but not all. So like 2/3 are. And then if we look to the far left, companies that have privacy teams, not surprisingly, most of, but not all, do have comprehensive measurement plans in place around privacy. You see below that, there's quite a bit of variation in terms of where it's being measured around the world. And I think importantly, we look to the right, and this really rounds out our story as we were discussing in our earlier slides. So what's the difference between companies that do and don't? So companies that measured, again, our average was 60, scoring just, it's kind of like saying, do you go to the gym? You're probably a little more fit, but we don't know. We're just asking, do you track your steps every day? We don't know if you're walking, but probably if you're tracking them, the likelihood is that you're doing them. So that's all we're saying here. And what we're observing is if you have some sort of measurement in place, your privacy index scores tend to be higher, so 9 points higher than average. The corollary, if you're not doing it, we're fairly confident that you're not doing things on the privacy front. So the corollary is, as with many things in life, if you're not doing it, it's a more precipitous decline. Your privacy index score at a not a failing grade, but it's a D, a 38%. And I think the last one I included was important, which is if you're not sure, and well, you may be measuring it, you may not be. Again, you're probably less than average, because obviously if this is something important to you, you're not only measuring it, but everyone in your enterprise knows that you're measuring it. And so there's not a lot of ambiguity there. So again, our title here is Insist on Measurement, Not Anecdotes. I like your term as well, Joanne. Let's not use guesswork. So companies that are measuring it tend to do better. Let's look at our next slide and round this out a little. And I say here that the number of KPIs seem to be growing. More and more things are getting measured as more and more things, I guess, have to be done. There are lots of things to measure. The privacy space, this is just the research eyes I have on it. You're the experts, but I can tell when I'm working in a space where that space is evolving. And so measurement tends to grow and people measure different things. So lots of diversity in terms of what gets measured. In terms of the outcomes, I think importantly, as too often we see in measurement, is none of these look to me like sort of vanity metrics. They all look like, no, we're actually doing something and we're tracking it and we have measurement that we can report on it. So love to get your take, both Joanne and Kristen, in terms of some of these privacy KPIs. Sorry, and just make one more point. OKRs, objectives, key results. A lot of companies who are just new to the game put in an OKR, which is like, let's get something in place in the next quarter or the next 6 months. That can be an important thing to consider as well, which is even before you're measuring, you're just measuring your ability to implement something. That can be an important step for companies. But again, I'd love to get your take on what you're seeing here in terms of the many different ways that companies are measuring privacy.
Yeah, and the measurement is definitely important to be able to communicate the effectiveness of your program to key stakeholders. And the NIMIDY framework and its activities do lend themselves to tracking measurement for effectiveness. Just a real simple example to that is, if you're doing training, you're going to want some measurement that people are doing the training and understanding the effectiveness of training, as to understand that effectiveness. And so, these activities within the NIMBY framework are a great way to kind of help identify, what are the types of things that you should be measuring to understand the effectiveness of your program. And this also applies to AI as well. Kristen, what are you hearing from customers on kind of what they're looking for?
Yeah, and I would say, and maybe it's just coming from my role as a product manager, but I've had a lot of unique KPIs that each organization is tracking that is a little bit different from other organizations. And I've heard, the request to be able to customize widgets as much as possible because they have different KPIs to report on. But I think overall, what I'm hearing is that customers want the ability to show how their program is performing to key stakeholders, whether those KPIs are consistent or a little unique to their program. So I think that my answer is probably because I'm a product manager and coming from that angle, but of course, that's what I've been hearing from customers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kristen. And also the outward communication that you are doing these things is really important, as we'll show you on the next slide.
We kind of talked about this earlier, but I want to reinforce it. What's important to you? The number one thing when it comes to privacy is actually keeping brand trust. So I want the audience to understand that we get so deep into the details and the measurement that the one thing that as we measure just globally, well, why is all this important? Because that's the way you keep trust with your clients. And then the mirror of some of these results is that the AI implications can be extremely challenging. So you're tackling AI. I just wanted to circle back on this. You're tackling AI because it's important, and at the same time, it's challenging. And if you're good at one, you're probably good at the other, only because you're competent at doing things. And being competent, it involves being responsible to your clients, making sure you can deliver on them, and have a brand that people trust. So we can move on, but I just wanted to reinforce.
Yeah.
This slide really reinforces that point.
Yeah, and I think that's a really critical point, Gary. And reinforcing that brand trust, and that's kind of the goal of the responsible AI certification, is having that simple, effective way to communicate that your organization has taken a principles-based approach to implementing responsible AI governance practices, in that we provide seal to help publicly communicate that. And then also, there is a dispute resolution service that is included as part of the certification, which further enables your organization to build that trust and transparency with your consumers. So that's could the help you with the kind of the last stage of your journey here, in the kind of that last part of our four-phased approach. We do have I know we're getting towards the top of the hour. We do have a couple of questions here, and there's one around how companies are addressing the governance gap with the use of AI. So in other words, responsible AI can be defined in many ways, and that is true. For example, with our responsible AI framework, which serves as the basis for our responsible AI certification, we leverage the 7 trustworthy criteria from the NIST AI risk management framework to build out that program and, find the key requirements that we're seeing, that is common across all these different frameworks. If it, the next part of the question is around, if a firm is using a popular LLM, a large language model, how are they mitigating the risk of their data, having their data be at risk of being used to train the AI model?
I can
And
answer that.
yeah, take that one, Kristen. That'll be great.
Sure. So it really depends on the LLM and the use case. But like Microsoft Azure AI, for example, has created what's supposed to be more of like an enterprise application that encourages other organizations to leverage their technology. And they do not train, or at least they have versions of their offering that doesn't train the data that you provide, doesn't train the larger LLM on the data that you provide. So I think it depends on which one you're looking at, because I don't know all of them, but I do know that some in particular allow you to keep it gated and keep it from training or going into the larger LLM. And then there's another question: if a regulator was to ask them how certain decisions were made, how companies are handling that, are they seeing risk of liability via hallucinations driving poor decisions? I mean, I know that in our use of AI, we have a privacy policy that includes some information about how we're using AI, and that hallucinations are always a risk of AI. It's not something that anyone's been able to solve for. It's just a problem that everyone is facing. So I think as long as it's kind of covered and you have it in your privacy policy, then it's still a risk and there's not anything that you can do about it. But at least from that perspective, you're covered. Joanne,
Yeah, I
anything
think,
on that?
yeah. One company that we're working with, they're also looking, even if the use of AI is considered low risk, I mean, personal data is not, involved. They still are looking to, document, like, yes, we took a look at this AI system. We understand how it's being used. So, even just doing a short, kind of AI use questionnaire on the system, just to have that documentation is a great way to show, like, it has, to demonstrate that, the system was reviewed. This, how we decided based upon our risk model. All right. Gary or Kristen, anything else to add to that?
No, I would just say, rounding out from the research perspective, companies that, took an anonymity approach or something similar in terms of a framework, they used, bespoke software, they took a principles-based approach, they tackled AI straight on. In all of these, we're seeing, if you want to stand out from the crowd, both in terms of privacy competence and your success, these are the winning plays.
Yeah, and Gary, as you talked about KPIs, do you have any tips that you can provide about measuring KPIs? That is principle only, no rules-based approach.
Yeah, I think just this, that when we say a principles-based approach, we don't mean operationally. We're still adopting, we're adopting processes that are based on the principles that we want to establish, that we've established, and we get things done. So operationally, we're doing technical things. I just want to make that clear. We're not just walking around talking about our mission or our principles. We're actually operationally doing things that make sense for our companies. And I think that's what Kristen's, alluding to, which is, that can vary a lot by company, but the ones who take a principles-based approach know exactly what they do, what their clients are demanding, and they want something that fits with that. So that ability to do something bespoke is really important. Now, if you take a different mindset and just say, well, what are the rules? Yeah, we technically hard-coded those in where we could, and oh my gosh, now they changed. Now what do we do? Well, we change ours. If you're always playing that kind of running after them game, you're probably not that good at both servicing your clients, because that's not what they're asking you to do. And even though you think you're trying to solve for what the regulator or compliance people want, you're not really doing that well either. So if you know what your clients want and you've got a privacy mindset, those two things are wrapped up together. And then you build your KPIs and your measurement around the things you know that you need to do to, again, I like to use the word safely, but to keep data that should be private and processing that should be private. Does that make sense?
That makes great sense. And we've had a great discussion here, a lot of great questions from our audience. I'd like to thank both Kristen and Gary for joining me here today and talking with you all.
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks
Thank you.
everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for
Pleasure.
joining us today. Have a
Bye.
fantastic day.